what does their egg production look like?
A Coturnix quail lays around 300 eggs per year, give or take. That's going to be dependent on a lot of different variables, just like a chicken, right? The chicken's going to lay 350 eggs a year, but if you're not feeding it properly or it's not lit properly, you're not going to get those eggs. So what that equates to is each female quail will lay about 5 to 6 eggs a week once they're into production. And so just like a chicken, they're going to be more productive younger in life. So like the first year and a half is going to be their most productive, and then they'll fall off from there. But that's what you should be expecting. Now, how big is a quail egg? So I think it takes 3 quail eggs to equal a bantam chicken egg. So it'd probably be about 5 to 6 quail eggs equals a full chicken egg. But they're delicious. They taste the same. A lot of people like to pickle them. A lot of people like to hard boil them. I don't currently have quail, but when I had them, I would scramble them up. I would eat them just like a chicken egg. They can be hard to crack, but they have these little scissors for that too. Yeah, it's a fun process.
Welcome to the Mother Earth News and Friends podcast. At Mother Earth News for 50 years and counting, we've been dedicated to conserving the planet's natural resources while helping you conserve your financial resources. In this podcast, we host conversations with experts in the fields of sustainability, homesteading, natural health, and more to share all about how you can live well wherever you are in a way that values both people and our Mother Earth.
Good day, everyone. I am Kenny Coogan, and joining me on this episode of Mother Earth News and Friends is Eric Stromberg. Eric is the director of the poultry division at Stromberg's. Today we're talking about raising quail for meat and eggs. Welcome back to the podcast, Eric.
Hello, Kenny. It's great to be here. I love talking about poultry, and quail is a great subject. So
yes,
excited to be
we're
here.
excited to hear from you. And we were just talking before we were recording. I just moved from Florida to North Carolina, and I might be interested in getting some quail for myself. So I'm particularly interested in the subject.
Yep, quail. I think a lot of people are interested in quail, especially when you might not have a lot of land. And I don't know what your circumstances are, but a lot of people will raise quail for the same reasons why people raise chickens, is because they want to control their own food source, and they want a high quality meat and a high quality egg, which, okay, we're talking a miniature version of a chicken, kind of. It's different, but that's what you think of it as, is, okay, I'm going to get smaller eggs and I'm going to get smaller meat, but they are both prolific. So that's why I think a lot of people start going down the path of raising quail.
Can you talk a little bit more about the key benefits of raising quail for meat and eggs compared to chickens and other poultry? I'm assuming they're going to eat less.
Yep. So they're going to eat less, and they're going to take up a lot less space and a lot less noise. A lot of people that raise them are in urban settings because you can raise them. You don't have to have a large chicken coop and a large chicken run. Many people raise them in garages or sheds, and they'll use what's called a battery cage. And that's just a cage with different levels. It's like an apartment building for quail, is how I would put it. Is you're going to have a cage. Generally, they're sloped, so when the bird lays the egg, automatically rolls out. And a lot of people are going to quail because less space, high quality meat, high quality eggs, less feed, less noise.
What are some of the first steps in getting started with quail farming?
One of your biggest challenges with quail, and also rewards, is that a lot of times hatcheries or breeders do not want to ship quail chicks. We work with a partner that ships quail chicks for us. Probably the first question that you have is, all right, what am I getting myself into here? Usually people are choosing between a bobwhite quail or a Coturnix quail, and that would be for meat and eggs. Now, bobwhite quail are more of a wild bird, so most people are going to go towards the Coturnix quail, which is like a domesticated version of quail. And so pretty much for this conversation, we're going to talk about Coturnix quail. And there are some variations of Coturnix quail. We sell a variation called the Texas A&M, and that was actually developed by research at the University of Texas A&M to have a quail that would both lay eggs prolifically and be a good meat bird. But most people just use like a either Coturnix or a jumbo Coturnix quail. So let's keep going along those lines. Is what's one of the big challenges that a new quail raiser is going to face? Usually you can only get fertile hatching eggs. And so the first thing that they're going to be faced with is they're going to have to incubate their own eggs. So that can be a challenge, but it's easily overcome. There's a lot of variety of incubators on the market. And so you can get something for very little amount of money, or you can get stuff for a lot of money. That is going to be one of your first hurdles, right? So what kind of incubator do you want? I try to steer customers away from the very bottom end of the incubators. There are some really good styrofoam incubators out there still. GQF makes one, Miller Manufacturing makes one. However, there is a flood of foreign incubators on the market that don't work that great. And so that's one thing that you want to avoid. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. Use a trusted brand. When you start to get into the more expensive incubators is automation. All you are doing is controlling 4 factors for those eggs to get them to hatch. You're controlling temperature, humidity, airflow, and turning. So the better the incubator, the better the thermostat, the better heating units. So that's controlling your temperature, right? So what that's going to do also is there's going to be still air incubators and there's going to be forced air incubators. Forced air incubators are just going to circulate the air and keep the whole incubator at the same temperature. So that's one feature that you're going to want to look for. Humidity, that's also critical for hatching. So Coturnix quail take 18 days to hatch. So your first 15 days, you're going to want your humidity a little bit lower at about 50%. And then the last 3 days, you're going to want to up that to 65%. That's what you'd be, that's the hatching time frame. And just things that you're going to want to think about also is the airflow of the incubator. Yes, incubator can have the right temperature, the right humidity, but you have to think of an egg as a living thing. So it still needs oxygen, right? So there needs to be some airflow there. And the last thing is turning. You're going to have to turn those eggs at minimum 3 times a day. So if you get an incubator that doesn't have an automatic turner, you're going to want to turn them by hand 3 times a day. And what we say is you always want to do it, turn them an odd number of times per day so that they're always on a different side. And then from there, you'll stop turning at that 15-day mark and let them hatch. Then they orient themselves and hatch out. If you have an automatic turner, put the pointy side down. So that's the quick and dirty version of how to hatch a Coturnix quail. There is many different versions and methods of incubating out there. So read up about it, but that's my quick version of incubation. But that is one of your biggest challenges is that you're going to be getting quail eggs right away.
So hatching quail eggs will probably lead to male chicks. Do backyard raisers care about this?
Coturnix quail do well in captivity. However, you do want a certain ratio of males to females so that the males don't, how do I put this? Overwork the females. Yes, I don't know. I didn't think that through before the interview there. So anyways, you don't want so many males that your females are being overwhelmed. And so what a lot of farmers do is they will harvest the meat from the males. That's a normal process. And just like when you get straight round chicks, that's what you're going for, is you're going to start harvesting the meat of the quail. And that's what you're really going for anyways, is you do want a good ratio so you can have both the meat and the eggs.
What age can you harvest the quail?
Usually it's 6 weeks. So it's a real quick turnaround. You will be surprised how fast they grow. It's almost like they double in size. It's like before your eyes. All of a sudden, you'll go and check on them the next day, and they've doubled. And that's what is fun. Also, is that you can see instead of a chicken where you're waiting to see the life cycle take place, you can see everything real quickly. Whether that's the hatching, instead of 21 days, it's 18. They're going to be laying eggs at 5 to 6 weeks. They're going to be ready to butcher at 5 to 6 weeks. So you can see the life cycle of a bird much faster.
What age can you sex Coturnix quail?
It's going to be about in that same age range, I would say. You'll start being able to sex them.
Do neighborhoods or municipalities or HOAs care about raising quail like they do for chickens?
That's a good question. That's hard to answer. I'm sure they do care. I have never heard any quail specific regulations on what you can do. So let's say you have a group of 12 chickens and a group of 12 quail. The quail will be so silent, your neighbors wouldn't even know unless they were really paying attention. The roosters do make a noise, but it's quiet for one, and it sounds so much like a wild bird, you probably wouldn't notice it unless you really knew what you were looking for. I hear more about people stealth raising quail, we'll say, than anything else, just because the regulations don't seem to apply. They don't eat that much, they don't have a lot of waste. So I think a lot of people fly under the radar, if you will, for quail.
My backyard neighbor in Florida raised a lot of Coturnix quail, and he had like the Pharaoh wild type, he had golden, white,
Yep.
silver, pied, blue, cinnamon, and there's probably a lot other color variations, which a lot of chicken breeders are familiar with about the different breeds and the different color varieties.
So I would say with chickens, like there's color variations, but there's also breed variations where with Coturnix, you're going to get pretty much the same characteristics, right? However, they just have a different coloration. It makes your flock prettier, but it's not going to change your egg production or meat production, let's say.
Speaking of that, you mentioned that you can harvest Coturnix quail at about 5 to 6 weeks old. You probably want to do mostly the males, and then the females will also start laying.
Yep.
What does their egg production look like?
A Coturnix quail lays around 300 eggs per year, give or take. That's going to be dependent on a lot of different variables, just like a chicken, right? The chicken's going to lay 350 eggs a year, but if you're not feeding it properly or it's not lit properly, you're not going to get those eggs. So what that equates to is each female quail will lay about 5 to 6 eggs a week once they're into production. And so just like a chicken, they're going to be more productive younger in life. So like the first year and a half is going to be their most productive, and then they'll fall off from there. But that's what you should be expecting. Now, how big is a quail egg? So I think it takes 3 quail eggs to equal a bantam chicken egg. So it'd probably be about 5 to 6 quail eggs equals a full chicken egg. But they're delicious. They taste the same. A lot of people like to pickle them. A lot of people like to hard boil them. I don't currently have quail, but when I had them, I would scramble them up. I would eat them just like a chicken egg. They can be hard to crack, but they have these little scissors for that too. Yeah, it's a fun process.
And they're expensive at the grocery market, which we're going to talk about after the break.
Okay, that sounds good.
What about diet? Do people feed the layers different than the meat birds, and what are quail in general eating? Or what should they be eating?
So the biggest difference between a quail and a chicken is that they grow so fast. So when they're young, they're going to need a higher percentage protein in their food. They're going to need a 28 to 30% game bird starter feed. And those protein ratios can vary a little bit, but I say I would never go like below 28 or 27. And usually what you're going to find at a Feed store is going to be game bird starter. That would be ideal. You can find turkey starters. Sometimes they'll call it all flock. But really what you're looking for is that protein percentage to be real high. And that'll help them put on the weight and develop their feathers fast enough.
What are some like the biggest quail health concerns, maybe in even regards to getting improper protein? Or are they a generally hardy bird? Because I know we've bred to exhaustion dogs and chickens, and some of them do have
Yeah,
problems, but a quail is a pretty wild type bird still.
they are. I always tell my customers, especially my first time customers, this is going to be your biggest hurdle is all right, your birds come or they hatch. Quail are so small, they're born to die, which sounds horrible, but they're very fragile at that, we'll just say like that 24-hour to 48-hour window, which let's face it, most birds are. However, the reason why quail aren't shipped around the country just like any other bird is because they don't last in transit. And so that's why we're shipping hatching eggs. Now, like I said, some breeders have figured it out and they will ship you quail chicks. We have a great survivability. However, what I would always tell a new customer is be very prepared for that first 24 hours, especially if it's your first time. Let's talk about some of those health issues. You want to make sure your brooder's all set up and ready to go. You're going to want to make sure you have feeders and waterers that are specific for quail. You're going to want to make sure you have that specialty feed right on hand. And then what I also suggest for those customers is for that first 24 to 48 hours is grind up their quail feed, make it smaller so the quail can ingest it faster and better. But also, usually chickens you keep at 95 degrees for the first week. I up that temp to about 100 for quail. I also make sure that I have a vitamin electrolyte supplement in the water for the quail right away. And so getting over that hurdle for quail chicks right when they're going into the brooder is probably one of the biggest hurdles that you're going to have. Also, let's talk about some health issues as they develop. A lot of people are raising quail on wire, which means they're not actually on the ground, they're on wire. You can avoid a lot of health issues that way because they're not on the ground. If they are on the ground, you're probably going to have some worming issues and you're going to have to deworm your quail every now and then, just like you would a chicken. Use a specific wormer for those birds and just follow the instructions. Otherwise, just like any other poultry, watch for coccidiosis, things like that. You could treat that with Amprol. But generally, I would say that quail are a very hardy bird.
So speaking of the wired flooring, what type of enclosures and housing are good for quail?
Most people build their own or buy what are called battery cages for quail. During the brooding process, you're going to have to keep them warm until they feather out. Then you bring them out to their area. Just like any other poultry, you want to make sure that it's dry. So you're either going to have the litter be dry or you're going to have the droppings go through to a dropping pan that you're going to be keeping constantly cleaned up, because a dry coop or a dry pen is a healthy pen. So then you're also going to want it to be lit and just have really good accessibility to food and water, just like any other chicken. With quail, a lot of times people will remove when chickens or quail or any bird have food, they do what's called billing out and they sift through it's like when you look in your refrigerator. I use this example all the time. It's the same food, but you still open up your refrigerator and you look in. Essentially what a chicken is doing when it does that, or a quail, they're doing the same thing. It's the same food. They're just looking through it to see if there's anything else. So a lot of times quail raisers will remove the anti-billing out properties from their feeders because the quail sometimes have a hard time using the feeders because they're so small. Or sometimes they'll make their own. For water, I brought this. All it is, it's a small cup. Most quail raisers, once the quail get to about 3 to 4 weeks, they'll use these little cups, and it just makes it easier for them to clean, and it gives the quail a clean water source at all points in time. It's a small cup, reaches through the caging and sits in the cage. There's 2 different styles. This one is a trigger, so the quail actually have to hit this trigger to get the water. There's also a little float valve style as well. but a lot of people will use those.
Or inside the enclosure, I don't know if we
Yep.
call it a coop because there's usually smaller, but for inside the
Yes.
enclosure, are we providing them perching? We would like a nighttime roost.
It depends on your setup. In brooding or in the battery cages, I've never seen anybody providing it. When I have raised them on the ground, I have always provided it. So the battery cages, usually they don't have as much amenities because they're really just being raised for those eggs and they're really in a small area. However, when I've raised them in pens and like more of a natural setting, then I'll provide them with all the amenities of outside feeders, waters, roosting. But I think quail like to stay, they kind of like a safe area, not so much of a roosting area. Does that make sense?
Yeah, our neighbor, he had a 6x6 coop, and then he would throw in evergreen tree or a branch in there, and they would hide under there.
Yeah, think of a covey of quail. They like to hide in thick brush and stuff like that. So not necessarily roosting areas, but hiding spots.
Now, the internet tells me that I should ask you, do you
Well,
need nest boxes for quail? And when I visited our neighbor who raised 40 quail, they were eggs peppered everywhere. You had to watch where you were stepping because they would just release them wherever they were at the time.
that is more common than the nesting boxes for quail. As with any bird, I would always watch the behavior of the bird. A lot of times you can try to get them to lay in corners. That's what a lot of people do. And that's just encouraging them to lay, maybe darkening the corner a little bit, things like that. But like you said, with quail, I've usually found that they're just laying wherever they want. A lot of people are using these battery cages that are rollout, so they don't care where the birds lay.
Are there any vaccinations that you would recommend for quail? Or are there any vaccinations available for quail?
I have never heard of any quail vaccinations. Now, am I a vet? No. But in all my years of the business, I've never been asked that question, but I've never heard of any vaccines. No.
We're going to take a quick break to hear a word from our sponsor. And when we return, we'll be talking about raising quail for profit.
Brinzy products are designed to be long-lasting and energy efficient. Their advanced series incubators and brooders feature the latest state-of-the-art digital control systems, providing instant readings of temperature and humidity to ensure successful hatches and healthy chicks. Check out Brinzy incubators and more at brinzy.com. That's www.brinsea.com.
We are back with Eric Stromberg. Eric is the director of the poultry division at Stromberg's. Eric, do you have any advice on how to market and sell quail products to stand out in a competitive market? And I was mentioning earlier that quail eggs at a grocery store are so expensive. I feel like if you go to a social media outlet and you post, hey, here's some fresh quail eggs, I think it could be a winner, depending on the market and where you live.
So, selling quail eggs and meat into a market would be, yes, packaging is key, standing out is key. A lot of people, what we see is they'll raise them in the country and they'll market them into the city, just kind of like what you're talking about, because that's where people are looking for that type of thing. I'm not saying you can't, it's just the concentration of people that are looking for quail in general in the cities is higher. So how do you get to those customers? Let's just say our first step is, no matter where you want to sell it, is that you're probably going to have a USDA inspected, if you're going to sell the meat, facility help you with that. Now for the eggs, usually you're going to be below any bird thresholds that are going to make you do any inspections and things like that, just like chickens. So you're not going to have to worry about that. But once you're past those two hurdles, Then you're going to also want to just make sure your presentation is correct and looking great. A lot of people are selling their quail to higher end restaurants, and we see customers doing very well with that, and into farmers markets. And with that, consistency is key. You always want to have your product there on a consistent basis. So let's say your farmers market's there every Saturday. You want to make sure you're there selling your quail every Saturday. And fortunately with quail is they are prolific egg layers. And once you start raising them, you can even start incubating and hatching your own eggs. You should always have a supply is what I'm getting at. So you should be able to consistently supply these farmers markets and restaurants if you so choose to. Another thing that we're seeing our customers being successful with is actually setting up websites and having people order frozen meat or fresh eggs and getting them delivered to their homes, just like anybody else would. So we have had some customers have success with that. In a competitive market, let's say I'm raising quail here in Minnesota. I know what it's going to cost me to ship 10 pounds of quail down to anywhere at this point in time with next day, or you can get it anywhere. You just bake those costs in, and if somebody wants them, they'll order them.
We are not going to be talking about the specifics of harvesting the quail for meat, but where would one go to find information on humane and efficient processing of quail? For instance, if you've never done it before, where would you start to learn how to harvest your own meat, or specifically quail?
My first step, I always recommend like the stories guides. There's a stories guide to poultry raising. That's an excellent read. Now, most people aren't using books anymore. Most people are going to YouTube. There's a lot of people that are out there that are really talented at showing exactly the process. I think there's one, Myshire Farms and the Caternix Corner. They do a great job with it. There's a lot of resources out there. And the nice thing about when you are harvesting your own meat with poultry, you're in the driver's seat and making that as humane as possible. So you're trying to keep those birds as calm as possible until the end. You're controlling their diet, you're controlling their life, and you're also controlling that end of life process. So just take it upon yourself and really do the research, whether it's reading or using reputable YouTube people, and just then make your best decisions.
I have the Stories Guide to Raising Ducks by Dave Holderreed, and the spine is broken. And I love that fact about my book. I've used it so many times and I've referenced it so much.
Yeah, those are excellent books. I can't say enough good things about the whole series. You can really take your education in your own hands with those.
Okay, Eric, the last question is, can you give me some numbers? What would the startup costs look like, or what are some like ongoing expenses?
It really varies, and I know this is a cop out, how skilled you are and what kind of space you already have. So there's a lot of really quality battery cages for quail out on the market, and you can get a section of quail battery cages for $100. You can build them probably cheaper that yourself, but it's going to take you time. Your biggest expense, as with any poultry raiser, is going to be your feed. And what I always recommend whenever you're raising your birds is to watch their behavior. And we spoke a little bit about feed waste feeders that are trying to prevent that feed waste. And that's going to be your biggest problem, is these birds are going to be billing that feed out. And every time they build that feed out, you can just hear the cash register ka-ching, because that's you going to the feed store and buying more feed. I have seen quite a few really good homemade feeders out there that start to address this issue. And I would recommend really looking into that and just saying, like, how can I stop my feed consumption from getting out of hand? So I know that's a bit of a cop out, but your biggest thing is going to be feed, and then your housing. If you don't have an area to house them in, that's like building the chicken coop, and that's going to be another big expense.
Thank you so much, Eric, for talking to me today about raising quail for meat and eggs.
Yeah, Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I love talking chickens or poultry anytime. So if you have another topic, just let me know and we'll get back together, Kenny, and have another webinar.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Kenny.
Thanks again to Brinzy, our sponsor for this Mother Earth News and Friends podcast episode. You too can experience the Brinzy difference and maximize your hatch rates with Brinzy incubators that monitor temperature and humidity and are made of antimicrobial materials. Brinzy ships worldwide and provides stellar customer support to answer all your questions. Hatch your chicks with Brinzy, the leader in innovative incubation research. Learn more at brinzy.com. Again, that's www.br.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Mother Earth News and Friends. To listen to more podcasts and get connected on our social media, visit www.motherearthnews.com/podcast. You can also email us at podcast@ogdenpubs.com with any questions or suggestions. Our podcast production team includes Kenny Coogan, Alyssa Warner, and myself, Josh Wilder. Music for this episode is the song Hustle by Kevin MacLeod. The Mother Earth News and Friends podcast is a production of Ogden Publications.